If you're looking for a place to hang out, figure out where you can take the next step in your dairy farming business, then you're in the right spot. Welcome to the High Performance Herd podcast. Here we will inform you what you can do today to future-proof your business for tomorrow. A big thanks to our sponsors Fonterra, Idexx, Koru Diagnostics, TasHerd, Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. I'm your host, Andrew Savage. Enjoy this episode of the High Performance Herd podcast wherever you may be listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and jump on our Facebook group, the High Performance Herd Project. Today in the High Performance Herd studio, I have Jeremy Savage. Jeremy is a dairy farm consultant who has worked with pasture-based dairy farmers throughout the South Island of New Zealand for nearly 30 years. He has interests in pasture-based dairy in the USA, coordinates the popular and closely followed SIDDC dairy farm at Lincoln, owns his own farm at the top of the South Island in New Zealand, and has just completed 2 seasons as the consultant for the Dairy Tasmania Focus Farm here in Tasmania. Hey Jeremy, welcome to the High Performance Herd podcast, and tell us something about yourself that most people don't know.
I run ultra marathons really badly, and when I was having a suit fitted the other day, I found out I have very short legs and a long back, so I'm not suited for it.
Well, that sounds like a genetic flaw, and full disclosure, Jeremy is actually my brother, so I'm glad there's some diversity there. You've been farm consulting for over a period of nearly 30 years, and some of our listeners may not have even been born then, and perhaps even some current experienced dairy farmers here would have been children when you started. You must have seen some big transitions in technology and on-farm practices. Thinking back to your first few seasons on the job and then back to today, what are the biggest shifts you have seen and some of the biggest challenges you have seen our dairy farmers overcoming during that time?
Yeah, I think the key one is we've had to develop a workforce in New Zealand and in Tasmania as well. So if you're back 30 years ago, a typical dairy farm was only 180 to 300 cows and very few staff were needed, where now we need to have managers and staff and contract milkers, the whole 9 yards. If you go back 25 years, the expectations of farm owners was to work staff very, very hard. They expected their staff members to become share milkers and to become farm owners and work 70, 80 hours a week. And that's been probably the biggest change. We've seen workload expectations, 45, 50-hour weeks now, regular time off. Often many clients got 5 and 2 rosters now, where it used to be 3 days a month. And what's really pleasing here, we've just started a run of new managers and contract milkers for next year, and the depth of skill and talent that we're seeing, and certainly in New Zealand now, is really improving. We're starting to retain people in the industry. Our churn rate, if you go back even a decade ago, our churn rate of people was very, very high. People weren't lasting long, whereas now they seem to be lasting in the industry. We're getting some real good depth, and hopefully you appreciate in Tasmania, you don't quite have that luxury at the moment, but hopefully you'll see that.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge. I feel like we don't maybe have quite the environmental pressures, but the biggest sustainability challenge facing dairy farmers is employing staff, and we've had dairy farms exit here for that reason. And there is the analogy that millennials, there was nothing actually wrong with millennials other than they pointed out everything that was wrong. And I feel like we've probably overcome that in the last decades, like you mentioned. You've had involvement in pasture-based dairy farms in Missouri. You've spent time in Ireland and other parts of the world. You were recently the farm consultant for the Dairy Tasmania Focus Farm, and that went for 2 seasons, and you oversee the South Island Dairy Development Centre at Lincoln in the South Island of New Zealand, and that is followed by many and is seen as the benchmark for producing milk solids from grass alone. What similarities and differences are there when dairy farming in different parts of the world? Do you think all these places have the same opportunities to produce high milk solids on grass alone, or do you see environmental and systemic differences that prevent the New Zealand system being fully replicated outside of New Zealand?
Look, I think the key thing with that too is just to really understand what the potential for your farm and your region is around growing grass and harvesting grass as well. So, that's number one. Even across New Zealand, we see quite a big difference. You're looking at 8 tonnes per hectare down the cow's throats in Northland, 10, 11 in Waikato, Canterbury 13, Southland 10. So understanding what your feed harvest potential is on your farm and in your region is really, really important, and then setting up a farm system that suits that. A well-managed cow, well-fed cow can eat about 3.8 to 4 tonne dry matter per cow. 4 tonnes probably about the limit in terms of if you're really, really good at it. So if you feed harvested, that's what you can consume down the cow's throats is 12 tonne. You can get 4 tonne down the cow's throats. Your stocking rate should be 3 cows to the hectare as well. So we use FarmX Dairy as a modelling program for that, but you can always do some backwards calculations with a consultant who knows how to do this. So that's probably the key one, is setting the right stocking rate for your farm's potential. One opportunity I really see for us in terms of pasture-based farmers is our cost of production so low compared to the TMR high input sort of systems that are running around the world. So 85% of world milk production comes from TMR type systems, high total mixed ration systems, with cows housed indoor for a bulk of the season. Only 15% of milk comes from pasture-based farm programs. So that's New Zealand, Tasmania, Chile, Ireland. We're doing a bit of it in America, but that's pretty tough. You've got to be very, very close to the coast to make it work. Argentina are another country that's just starting to kick into gear now with their systems as well, and a wee bit in Brazil, but there's not much around the world that can do it. Put it in perspective, those TMR systems are costing, the cost of production is around that sort of $9.50 to $10.50, with sitting in that either New Zealand or Australian dollars in that range. And we can produce milk on our grass-based systems, pasture-based systems for sort of about $5 to $6 per kilo milk solids. Now, it's certainly coming under pressure at the moment. Our cost structures have lifted from $4.50 to $5.50 here in New Zealand, and there's actually upwards pressure on that even more. But when you're looking at the international milk price at the moment, even on a pasture-based system, we've got a $3 to $4 margin. When you're looking at the TMR systems, their margins are under $1 or sometimes less. So they rely heavily on the stock income to make their profitability as well. So, personally, I think it's an opportunity of a generation for pasture-based farmers. It's quite exciting times, and we need to make the most of this as well. So we've got to be pretty careful with our costs to make sure we can use this period to pay off the debt. There may be an end to the period. Nothing beats high prices like high prices, so we've got to be careful about product substitution and synthetic foods and those sorts of things undercutting us in the future. But I'm quite positive for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, and it paints a really great picture of what's in store for pasture-based dairy farms and the risk of that tight margin. And a lot of people look to the Lincoln farm. You're quite out there getting a lot of public information out. It's been quite well publicised that you've previously achieved north of 500 kilos of milk solids on just pasture. Is this farm just one out of the bag, or for dairy farmers out there thinking I'd love to be able to do 500 kilos on pasture, is that possible? Do you have other clients doing this type of production?
Yeah, I've often suggested they move out of your Deerfield Lincoln University dairy farm to another spot. It is a wee bit unique. It's not the best demonstration farm. It sits at 6 metres of altitude. It has amazing winter growth rates. It has cropping soils as well. So they're able to, and it's all tetraploid pastures, all pretty much, and they're able to really get a good long lactation with really high quality grass. So 500 kilos, I can't emulate that on too many other farms. I have done. I have had clients who have achieved that. Quite often I've used, instead of silage, they've used a wee bit of grain, but only 400 or 500 kilos a cow. So that's not impossible, but you've got to be very highly strung, have everything go right to do it. Where Lincoln's able to do it with do it with ease. My experience of it, by the time you take into account the fact your farm has a few diploid pastures on it. You might be a bit shorter in your lactation season because the frosts come in or in at both ends of the season. 450 to 470 kilos a cow is probably about the sweet spot for pasture-based systems as well. Most farms over here will have a touch of grain or palm kernel in them. And the reason why we've gone to that is really around quality. We can't guarantee good quality silage and at big enough volumes that we need to sustain the dairy industry here as well. So, but I reckon that's the sweet spot, 450, 470, and with a reasonable skill level to be able to do that as well. And we've been working with the Focus Farm with James, and he's sort of been bouncing in that range too.
Yeah, that's great. I wonder if, there's a fair bit of support there too, and having maybe a few thousand dairy farmers peeking over your shoulder may hold some accountability stories with it.
Yeah, that'd be a fair comment. There's nothing like that as a motivation for Peter, the farm manager, to crack on and repeat it year on year.
Yeah, no, I'd be a bit nervous, but that's great that, anyone can really, if they upskill and have a crack, they could achieve similar type of success. The High Performance Herd project is centred around collaboration and getting companies who are doing all great things for the dairy industry to break down some barriers. So we're not all working on our own products and dashboards in isolation to each other. The project is centred around the herd and the animals' interaction with the system and the people in the system. Of all the animal wearables, new milk tests, animal health practices, labour-saving devices, which one are farmers seeing as the silver bullet to their problems? Is there one thing that gives the biggest return on investment, or do you think it's more of a holistic approach?
Yeah, I think it's more of a holistic approach, and you need to understand why you're getting into this technology and how it impacts your farm. So probably, number one, getting the right support. And this just isn't the support from the person that you're buying the technology from. This is also around the professional support from your vets, your farm consultants, your milk testers, and etc. Can they support you in terms of the decision makings and reading the information and helping you get better results with that as well? So that's one thing that's been lacking with some of these technologies and has been well supported and well adopted with other technologies as well. So many people buy shiny things and then 3 years later fall over because of lack of support. And you need to really assess what skills are needed on farm. We've had a case where certainly been short-staffed at the moment. Some of this technology has worked really well because collars have done a better job at drafting cows for mating than a dairy assistant with very, very little training. So it can actually go in your favour. Other technologies require, because of the interfaces of computers, etc., to do it, they can be quite complicated and quite tricky to use. So really get your head around that and make sure you talk to a number of farmers who've used this technology before and ask those questions as well. Probably, and when it comes to technology adoption, I've got a real key rule of thumb that I use to run the cutter over. It'd be interesting to run through these exercises with your project and time, Andrew, when you get some good quality data in terms of cost and benefit as well. So, for every dollar that you spend on the technology, you need to get $3 back. So that dollar that's spent includes subscriptions, capital costs, interest, depreciation. So that's and any other cost that might be associated with it, whether it's detergents, milk testers, etc. So work out what that's going to cost, and then what are the benefits that come back to you as a consequence of that. So I'll pick on collars, and we've looked at a range of collars over here. So the benefits that we've been getting back is we've improved our empty rate by up to 4%. 2% of it comes from better submission rates, so a better submission of cows and better conception rates. We're picking up another 2% in terms of our empty rate using short gestation semen. So we've got a bull over here with LIC. His gestation rate is 22 days shorter than the standard bull, So it means we can mate for another 10 days. But every week that we mate, we drop our empty rate by 1.5 to 1.8%. So we can pick up another 2% drop in empty rate there. So we're looking at a genuine 4% sort of drop in empty rates for many farms, using using collars. Then you're getting savings in labour. You don't need to have your management sitting in the shed for 6 weeks, drafting cows. And then you're going to start. So they're real costs. They're real savings, and you can put the savings against that. Whether it's adjustment grazing for heifers, and hourly rates for management and things. You're going to also need to put a couple of intangibles in there as well in terms of other benefits, and have a think about that. I've got and so what I'm running through is for large scale farms, we're going to see. I anticipate we will see a 10 kilo milk solids a cow improvement in per cow production. And I'll give you an example of one last week. Last year, without collars, he was up at the morning at 3:30 every morning, 6 weeks straight. By about week 2, he was exhausted, and he would go to bed at 8:30 when his kids had cleared the house and have an hour's sleep. Now, I wouldn't begrudge him of his sleep, but that was when he should have been checking his cows. So he was doing 5 hours of milking and drafting, an hour of sleep. That was it. His workload now is a 6 o'clock start. He goes and checks the cows on the way to the cow shed to see how they're grazing. The first herd that come out of the shed goes, meets the staff, checks the computer. Then he goes back to the house for breakfast after he's checked the other cows, has breakfast, goes out and checks the cows again. It's all about grazing management. So he was doing 1.8 kilos of milk solids a cow. But in November last year, I was out there last week, he was doing 2.05. He'll do more than 10 kilos a cow lifted per cow production. So so when you're looking at $1 spent to $3 back, thinking about some of the intangibles that you can get there. And you're going to find that when you run through these technologies, it doesn't work. So when you're getting approached by, as a farmer, getting approached by technology salesmen or companies, ask these questions, right? What's the cost? What's the depreciation? How long is the gear going to last? Where do you see the benefits coming back, and have a bit of a workout on that? The reason why I use 1 to 3 is it gives a bit of fat. As a rule of thumb, if we're spending $1, we should always make 2 in any business. It doesn't matter if you're, in terms of a margin, but especially with farming. So that 1 to 3 just gives you a bit of a fat for things going wrong, and you're not quite getting all the benefits you expected out of it. But 1 to 2, if you're really excited about it, anything under that, you shouldn't really be adopting that technology.
Well, that's really open your mind up to, like you think collars are just for heat detection, but that story of being able to actually go and check the cows and check the residuals, and there's so much more to it when the salesman's talking to you about what comes out of the shiny box. So it's about having that big overarching view. One problem that we've come across, or that is being raised in discussions that come up within the group, is and in my day-to-day job is the share milker story. So when you're talking about $1 in and $3 out, how would a share milker who wants collars to help him save labour demonstrate to the farm owner that actually, hey, Mr. Farmer, you're going to make a heap more in production out of this through exactly like that story you just told? There's an opportunity there, surely, that we can actually offer some financial stories to those share milkers and farm owners.
Yep. So that example I gave you is one of those. So that was a contract milker. We sat down a year ago before we committed to it, went through from an owner's and share milker's perspective. Where they landed was they went to subscription basis rather than buying those collars, and they've agreed to share the cost 50-50. And that's how they thought the benefits were going to play out and pan out. Yeah, absolutely. And as a share milker, you need to be able to have the confidence to be able to bring that stuff to the table with your farm owner and discuss it and work out how it works. Some of the other technologies are not so palatable. We've got a few labour-saving technologies which, in theory, should be all on the contract milker. So when you start adjusting for the contract milker or the share milker, how their income needs to be trimmed really makes them think twice. And we've had a few fall over for that reason.
Yeah, that's right. It's how do you demonstrate that cup removers, for example, are going to, and in theory, you could nearly tell the same story. Well, actually gives me an opportunity to check pasture. So it's really about being open with your business partners and bringing someone into that conversation.
Yeah, the cup remover one's an interesting one. We had over the years, what we've done is we have highlighted to the farm owner what rate they would need to pay. This is for contract milkers. What rate they would need to pay for a contract milker to be profitable with or without cup removers. And we did the exercise just last year with 2 farms of 1,500 cows each. That was 10 cents a kilo milk solids less they would have had to pay the contract milker if they installed cup removers. So we were able to show that to them, and so that farm owner, he actually walked out of the meeting, ordered cup removers there and then, and came back, and we continued negotiations with cup removers then. So
yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's really about having those conversations and not stewing over the stuff yourself and communicating. There's a lot of pressure in New Zealand, probably more so there than some parts of the world, although Ireland has a lot of environmental pressures as well, and farmers are expected to be reducing their environmental footprint. And that's always been there. Farmers have always been planting waterways, optimising effluent systems. That's been happening for decades. But what's coming down the pipeline now is quite different to anything we've seen before. We can't just install some infrastructure or fence off a creek to reduce our carbon footprint. What are your clients talking about, and what actions do you see them taking to ensure that they remain sustainable into this next decade?
Yeah, I think probably first for your Australian viewers is just don't get too confident. I recall having a Danish client over here 20 years ago talking about their environmental restrictions. They were at the point where they could no longer grow milling wheat. So to grow milling wheat, you need to be able to use nitrogen for the protein. And their restrictions were so great that they couldn't do that anymore. I was confident that we'd never see that sort of shenanigans in New Zealand. They laughed at me. 15, 20 years later, they were spot on. So it's coming for Tasmania and Australia as well. Just give it 5 years. In terms of, we probably got distracted a wee bit with Overseer. So Overseer is a computer simulation model that pumps out what goes to groundwater, what goes through your soil profile, and can be leached into the water table. So it's a pure computer simulation model, and there was a lot of discussion whether it was right or wrong or not. Where the thinking's moved on from that now in terms of, this is what the computer says, is actually thinking about, okay, the computer says that in terms of going through the soil profile, but what's going across my land as well? So what's going through the runoff in terms of surface runoff? So that's typically sort of phosphates and E. coli and those sorts of things. And how can I start limiting the amount of surface runoff and by strategic planting of grasses, keeping fences and keeping grass longer, especially around winter feed paddocks, how we graze our winter feed paddocks from top to bottom, where we put our winter feed paddocks as well, and at low risk areas too. So really starting to think about my farm, how can I drop the risks? What management implications that can be done? And it's interesting. Some of it actually is probably a step backwards. Probably what you and I were dealing with when we were younger, Andrew. Dealing with temporary troughs and moving troughs around paddocks and square breaks and all those sorts of things. So, some of the things that would be done 30, 40 years ago, we're relearning some of those lessons there now as well. Another one that's quite important too to get your heads around is around nitrogen surplus. So your nitrogen surplus is nitrogen that comes in the gate. So it comes in the gate with your heifer replacements. So it's protein on the body, and all your supplements that come in. Grains quite low in nitrogen, it's low in protein. Grass silage is high in protein, and also nitrogen fertilizer that comes in. So we can have a supply side And then the demand on nitrogen is milk that goes out the gate and cows that go out the gate. The difference between the two is your nitrogen surplus. What's been really interesting is, this 190 cap. So in New Zealand, we're having a 190 kilos of nitrogen per hectare cap, so we can't use any more than that anymore. We were using 235 in Canterbury. We've dropped our nitrogen use by about 40-45 kilos of N without affecting production. So we've seen our nitrogen surplus drop by, just from that one action alone, with good management complemented, by 40 kilos of N per hectare. And that's been pretty sobering. And so how efficient is your farm system? How can you do that? Dairy NZ have a nitrogen surplus calculator online. And if you're a Farmex user, that has your nitrogen surplus as well. So that's a really good indicator of how efficient your farm system is and what can you do about it.
And have you seen a drop in production as a result of that drop in nitrogen use, or farmers finding some initiatives and different gains in their system?
Yeah, we really thought our throats were cut with that one, and we were pretty upset with our government telling us how to farm. But in hindsight, there's been a few management techniques we've been able to do. So Lincoln University Dairy Farm, they found if they went from 400 kilos of N when clover root weevil went through and destroyed all the clover, down to about 150. And they also dropped their stocking rate from 4 to 3.5 cows to the hectare. That lower stocking rate allowed them to run with around 3 days longer. So they were 20, then they averaged 23. That slightly longer round length and longer covers grew 1.5 tonne more. So by dropping nitrogen use, they had, in theory, 3 tonne less feed harvested. But that longer round length actually negated a lot of the damage that nitrogen did as well. So there are management techniques you can like some round length management things, you can help to minimise the damage. But we are probably feeling it a wee bit more, and we're feeling it right now as well, with pastures going to seed a bit more aggressively in feed quality, and the use of mowers were probably less nitrogen but more greenhouse gas in terms of diesel, because we have to keep doing a bit more topping to try and keep cows intakes up and things as well.
These things always have a knock-on effect. We could go down rabbit holes all day long, I reckon, but in the interest of time, we'll probably look to wrap it up. Now, you've offered our listeners a huge amount to think about, and we're thinking about the overwhelming amount of information that farmers are digesting at the moment. Give them one key takeaway. What's one nugget you would send a listener away with that they can percolate on for their business?
Being a pasture-based dairy farmer is an opportunity of a lifetime at the moment, around our cost of production. We can be the Saudi Arabia of milk, but to achieve the gains that we can get out of this, you just need to have absolute focus on cost structures. So, really know what your cost structures are. Keep taking out unnecessary inputs. And that can be cropping programs, it can be feed programs, it can be those sorts of things. Focus on getting your grass harvested up as much as possible. Just keep driving that. And when you're adopting technology and those sorts of things, making sure, and infrastructure, as mentioned before, make sure you're including depreciation, etc., on those costs as well.
Well, that's gold. Thanks very much. Really appreciate you taking your time to spend with us today, and we'll have you on again one day soon.
No worries.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to the High Performance Herd podcast. Thanks to the sponsors, Fonterra, Idexx, Koru Diagnostics, TasHerd, the Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. Feel free to subscribe and review the podcast. Share it with your friends. The more, the merrier. Jump on Facebook, search the High Performance Herd Project, and you're very welcome to join the High Performance Herd private Facebook group. If you want to see a video of this podcast, jump on YouTube or www.highperformanceherd.com, where you'll see a link to these sponsors for more information on the High Performance Herd Project, which is a real-life dairy farm spring block calving right here in Tassie. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.